Welcome back, everybody. This is the Hall Talk with your host, Malcolm Smith, the CEO of the National Dump Trucking Association. This show was built to shine light on the overlooked dump trucking industry that I like to call the secret society. If you're not in this industry, you won't know anything about it. And today's show, we're bringing on Jeremy Bell of Dirt Rocks, the president of Dirt Rocks. And Dirt Rocks is moving massive amounts of material all through the U.S. So stay tuned and you will learn a lot about rail, about quarries, about rock, about all the different type of materials that's being moved to these data centers and these different projects. And if you stay tuned, you can get some inside information about where to move and how to get onto these projects. Jeremy, I'll let you introduce yourself, man. You have a laundry list of accolades that you've done. So you have the floor.
Malcolm, appreciate you having me. It's an honor. It's also an honor to advise your board as well. I do believe your platform is critical. You're right. Dump truck is one of those interesting, unique, but uncovered sectors in our industry, right? And it's ever evolving. I think people need to understand that, especially owners, even brokers, right? Even business owners and distributors. I feel like, even aggregate companies and material producers. So it all fits in the multiple ways that we do business, right? And whether we want to distribute or deliver or whether we want to fade and not take the risk. So it's, to me, having that platform that, and the people behind you, Malcolm, is awesome. So thank you for your time and having me today.
And I appreciate you joining our board and definitely giving us so much insight into your world and what you do. It's been very, interesting to say the least. Dealing with Dirt Rocks and what you guys do. The Jamaica story you told me about was crazy. But hey, take us back. What's your first memory of being around the dump trucking industry? I know we've talked about, your family has been in dump trucking for a while, been around it. So, take us back.
So I'll take you back. We'll go back to 1955. Magic City was started by my grandfather and his partner, Ed Grills. And back then, dump trucks didn't I think they were below $30,000, maybe $20,000. And they bought all Max and they bought all green Max, and they had the gold hood ornament on them. And they ended up having a big contract with U.S. Steel in Birmingham. And then they decided to open another kind of a different geographic region. They went to Sarasota as well and had a big outfit there that my uncle ran. And I think at one time they were probably north of 350 units. And that carried on from, the mid 50s all the way up through about the 90s. And, and so as we saw as the period of when the EPA picked up under the Carter administration down to, and they started pulling coal out of the South and things like that. It kind of slowed down. And so, I've always through the life have been exposed to the different elements up and down of the trucking industry, right? I mean, it's always on the verge of growth or a bubble, just sort of like the real estate market is, in my opinion. So grew up around it, probably coming out of the womb. Just to be honest.
So how did that path from that journey to running Dirt Rocks? Was it rocky? Was it linear? Was it, up and down? How did you get to running Dirt Rocks from, dump trucking being in your family?
A lot of great, the one common denominator that I can probably share throughout all of this is that everyone that has influenced me or I've been around has always shared the trailblazer pioneer mindset, the duck, the water rolls off your back, so to speak. Having that mentality and learning how to just get up and deal with it every day and take the losses. I think there's a common individual throughout each stop, and and I think it takes that type of determination to keep going and growing. So, from starting out as a single truck owner to you know to running north of a $120 million business, those type of principles and aspects are there every day, and that mentality and mindset is there.
So, dirt rocks. When you hear that, what does that term mean to you? When you hear dirt rocks, if they
So it is it for me, dirt rocks and the owners of the company as well. Um, it is a business of getting up. It is grit. It is determination. It is teamwork. It is willing to deal with the good and the bad. But it's willing to rely off the team members around you. And I will say that the most unique part of my day is when I wake up and I realize the team that we have around us, right, and the support of the owner behind us. And quite frankly, it is the most unique team I've ever been around. But I think that's what the catalyst for success, right? For what success for us is. It's not cookie cutter in a way that bogs you down. It allows for free thought, and it allows the appetite to try, right? And I feel like if you take that out of a corporate environment and then you put people from that environment into this environment, I think it breeds a lot of think tank, and I think that is just really what is the driving catalyst behind us.
So let's get into dirt rocks. Let's talk about what do you guys do per se, and tell the audience, just break down what dirt rocks is, who you are, what do you guys do, what do you accomplish.
So Dirt Rocks primarily works within a coastal market, what we would refer to as a fragmented space within the market. So we're accessible, or our strategic areas are accessible by three modes of transportation or logistics, right? So you're going to have maritime fare, you're going to have railroad, and you're going to have trucking capabilities. The reason for that is most of the time your construction material is located north of 400 miles away from you at certain points. And I feel like that is the case around the East Coast. What that does is allows the ability for us to procure and deliver and be competitive. Fortunately enough, within what we refer to as the lower half or the valley of Texas, up through Louisiana, you're actually looking at a lot of natural gas that sits on top of oil, which is an alternative energy source with long-term offtake. And within the long-term offtakes, you're looking at massive infrastructure over the next, I would say it's 29% growth over the next 8 years. It will be the largest segment. I think it quadruples I don't think there's anything that pales in comparison, or can hold water to it right now, just to be honest. And it's happening, and uniquely, it's discussed, but it's discussed in a way that's kind of, if you don't know and you're not in energy, you may not be aware of what is going on, right? So it is fascinating just to see. The very first project I was on, we've done millions of tons of asphalt work and Department of Transportation work in Aldot. Man, it was like, oh, this job was $13 million. And, oh man, we've got this job and it's exciting and it's 13 million. And then all of a sudden you find out that you have a purchase order on a $5.8 billion project, and you're just like, yikes. There's a world of difference, right? And so all of a sudden the understanding behind that and the appetite behind that, it doesn't really change other than how you work with your customer to deliver, right? But seeing it firsthand has been one of the most unique experiences I've ever had in my life. It's mind numbing to pull up to a site of 600 to 800 acres, and there's 47 cranes in the air, and there's just 4,000 people on the ground, and I couldn't even tell you the amount of yellow iron running around. And I mean, it looks chaotic, but it's so organized and it flows well. But I mean, there's nothing I've ever seen quite like it. And honestly, that's the settling part about it, right? The unsettling part about it is providing to meet their needs every day.
So is it true you guys right now have what, 5 rails going, I guess, or that you
Yeah. Yeah. So we are several in Louisiana, several through the state of Texas. Um, and so, rail is a game. It's not a game.
what is it that rail does? What network does rail unlock that dump truck owner operators can't? Like paint a picture for how rail and trucking is, two entities, but they can work together. What give the audience a little bit more so they can understand it.
Yeah, right. I mean, well, ultimately, rail and construction material try to work well together too. Sometimes quarries do not have access to rail. Sometimes rails are very far outside of the point of origin of the quarry themselves, right? And that can happen too at the very end destination towards, mega projects. As much as we want to, um, we can't really say, hey, we would love to build this project on a rail line, or we would love to build this quarry with with rail access. Most of the time, that's not the case. So you have to find a way, just like anything else, to tie into a particular line, whether it's a class one or class two. And then when you get to a certain end destination, you have to look the same. So you can't completely rule other forms of logistics out at that point. You can shorten the window. Also, too, look, it, just because rail is obviously it's very convenient, right? But that doesn't mean that trucking long distances sometimes can't be as competitive or is a better fit. I mean, and so estimators and large construction companies and or anybody else that moves a commodity, well, we just happen to do it in that space. They're gonna evaluate every mode of transportation they can. And those are going to be between that and barge, and you throw that in there as well. You're looking at 3 or 4 forms of logistics that they're all going to quote in these fragmented markets. Quality control is if you're looking at QC measures versus what if it's quality of the hauler versus quality of material. Obviously, there's two different things, but we evaluate both, right? We're quality control under material testing we're obligated to do under the purchase agreements. Quality of the hauler is imperative because they have to meet the criteria of all of us, right? And they have to maintain proper credentials. You mentioned something, Malcolm, before. You said rail may not be something that is understood well in the dump trucking market. And it's kind of interesting kind of an interesting way to put this, right? Rail can get you through somewhere, right? Think about it that way. I'm at the Atlanta market. The odds of me railing something to Atlanta are probably slim to none because, depending on for the dump truck market, right? Plenty of people rail to Atlanta, plenty of intermodal facilities, but it's not going to be the preferred method to transport your goods because it's a very consolidated, concentrated market. So if you want to get a product through Atlanta, through traffic, well, of course you can rail it through there, but you're also in a very concentrated market for materials. So I would say the same in kind of like the Houston market. You can get it there, you can get it on the fringe, but ultimately when you start dispersing it from its end destination of rail, you're going to have to get it through, the Houston market, right? Which is very intense traffic. In the fragmented markets, it tends to be a great end destination, as for us as well. So, the mystery behind the hauling that's involved in it, Malcolm, is that people feel like they go head to head, and that couldn't be further from the truth. It's sometimes in our industry, it's supplemental is a great way to phrase that, right? It's getting it close enough to be able to make the haul make sense. Can I cultivate 1,000 to 2,000 different trucks in a 150-mile radius from one project? No, never going to be able to do that, right? But can I land material on the ground outside on the fringe and use upwards of 200 trucks a day? Absolutely. So that's how it works, kind of hand in hand, you know? That's what I would say. You have these supplemental, um, types of relationships that matter, that complement each other in that regard.
So, Jeremy, speaking of trucks, rail, and dirt rocks, what is the relationship between dump truck owner operators and dirt rocks? Is it more direct, higher, brokerage, or hybrid?
Great question, right? The market is going to dictate what you do, right? As for us, we have a sister joint venture that we typically utilize, and for us and our back office purposes, and for the ability to get and the hauler paid and get fulfillment of the project and to get dispatched out, it's easier for us to use one source with a back office and fulfillment and join the fulfillment centers together. That really tends to make things run very smoothly. If not, it becomes disjointed. We would need multiple people to keep up with a lot of things. So the market's really going to determine that. To be honest, if I were a hauler at this point, I would look at somebody that had a fulfillment center, and somewhat kept me busy with the volume of work, right? So likelihood, I would give you an interesting stat and just say that 8 out of the top 12 markets are in fragmented areas, and with fragmentation comes brokerage because there's multiple forms of logistics. So 8 out of 12 are accessible by rail, they're accessible by ship, and they're accessible by dump trucks. So you have to really look at that and say, how are we going to get along here, right? And what's the need? And so definitively, it becomes unique. To throw a stat out there, 42% of all construction put in place falls within 7 states for the United States, and it's mind blowing. And so if I'm a truck owner, I'm looking at this, I'm saying, well, man, I better stay in Texas. I better go to Oklahoma, Texas. If I'd follow the grid from Missouri down Texas over, incorporate Tennessee, and come, stay in somewhat of the Southeast over Texas, just because of the CPIP dollars that are spent, and then it's massive. The rest of it is really unique. The West Coast right now is falling around probably 20%, but it has massive population. There's just not a lot of outside of road building and the IIJA. There's not a lot of spend going on out there as far as the infrastructure is. So most of your energy sectors and your data centers and things like that are sucking a lot of dollars in from the private market, and here you have it, right? And it's all kind of located within that area.
All right, so let's go on a little tangent. We'll come back to the haulers. Let's talk about the IIJA and the energy sector. What are the strongest sectors right now that haulers should be focused on, not just from a dump trucking standpoint, but from a business perspective? Where should they be positioning their companies to find real opportunities?
Yeah, I think, look, I feel like there's a double-edged sword there, and it's not double-edged in a bad way. I feel like it is. I think it is. The IIJA is infinitesimally important, and it's federal dollars, right? And that is amazing. I will just state this again. When you look at IIJA dollars, but then you look at DOT spend, Texas by far is insurmountably the largest state that requires the DOT spend. I mean, it's in $25 to $30 billion a year, along with the other infrastructure that is there. So if you couple that together, but if I'm in say the Southeast market as well, I would study both, because both have a very healthy trajectory. The Fed spend may have more of kind of a plateau effect at times, and energy may be a hockey stick. And right now we're seeing sort of the hockey stick effect with data centers and large LNG plants and energy in the energy sector. The steady the steady horse right now will always be the road building budget, right? I mean, you've got the 90-10, 80-20 split that they do. And so that's always imperative. So, if you can do both, I feel like you come out ahead.
We talk about data centers a lot because of the boom we've seen. The hockey stick effect. Data centers are still being built, but what's going on in that market that's causing it to slow down?
Well, it depends on the investment, I believe. But I'm not the expert too much on that, but I have seen a lot of data centers start, and I've seen success within those centers. I've seen where they've been stymied and they stop, right? I feel like the quantity and the expectation within the data centers can be an interesting topic for anybody to understand, because a lot of times, if you were to compare a data center to an LNG plant, you're really dealing with LNG. It's really unique because you're dealing with contractors that are extremely brilliant and precise on their quantities, so that they know exactly what they're bringing in, when they're going to bring it in, exactly how long it's going to take them to set their subgrade, set things up in their schedule. So they're very just meticulous about that, and they're very successful about it.
And what's an LNG plant for those who don't know?
So that's a liquid natural gas facility, right? So when you go in and frack for oil, you end up with liquid natural gas, and that has become a source of energy that is being utilized overseas. So you've got the receiving end, which could be European and Asian countries as well right now. But as far as the amount of LNG that is available, that it is unfathomable to understand just how much it is. So they have to compress the gas in trains, then they put it into ships, and then they ship it overseas. So yeah.
All right, let's jump back to haulers. When you're hiring, what separates a hauler you call back from one you don't?
We want to know where they are, right? And we want to know, again, we're paying them. So, we want to be able to capture what it is that they have and need, and that they're there, and that our customers fulfilled. So it's really, the criteria is how will they work with our fulfillment center, right? That would be the integral piece of that. And work with our sister partner, our sister company.
Compliance is a topic we hit a lot. Walk us through what you guys are doing on the compliance side. Vetting, COIs, any other metrics you're looking at. Is it more on-site, or do you do your due diligence up front?
We'll do our due diligence, but for us, we've had a really long-term, very big outfit. So because the market bears such long distances of hauling, and there's so much available work, that you're looking at distances of rock coming 400 miles sometimes. The freight is better than it is on ship. The type of rock that is coming in is actually quite unique because it's out of one certain location. And so your truck is your best bet. Going back to the compliance issue for us, it's, if we're going to, is the size company we are, if we're going to spend our time finding and vetting those haulers, it's going to be very difficult. So we'll have, a joint venture sister company do that. And those relationships are vetted by them, but then do meet our criteria after that.
Speaking of big projects, I've been wanting to get into this one. Tell us what happened with the run that you guys had in Jamaica.
Yeah, look, I shed some light on it, right? It was something that we have used and learned a lot from. And I wish our owner were here to tell you the actual experience of that. But we ended up like I said, as a pioneer and trailblazers would do, we could try things. And so we thought that bringing in riprap from Jamaica on a ship that was not ours, at that point in time, and offloading it, what we didn't know, and this has been explained to me several times, what we didn't know is the lack of priority we would get, and then what demurrage would cost. And then how long she could sit out in the ocean and wave at you from like from the sea, and 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 it's all of a sudden your price is going up, and so it's one of the maximum teachable moments within, I think, our company. However, knowing what we know now, we're probably not near as afraid of doing it again. I think we had to kind of dip our toes into it, right, and see where that was going to take us. But it was definitely something that at the point in time we didn't laugh at, but now we kind of look at it and say, hey, we've survived it. We learned something. It didn't kill us, and we move forward.
What was the biggest thing you learned from that? What was that gut punch moment?
The people, you hire people for a reason, and people are exceptionally talented for certain. You can't do it all. That's where that was the maximum takeaway. I feel like that I keep hearing. The reoccurring theme of people who are experts in their field. Not saying that we did it incorrectly whatsoever. I'm just saying that had we had known, we would have had that type. Now, mind you, 2 years later, we have that. So that was kind of the maximum teachable moment, is add that value and skill set to your team. Add that individual that has that knowledge. Right, and make sure that you don't have to do it all yourself. It's okay to source things. It's okay to have different relationships that are a value add outside of you within the value chain that you have from time to time. They have a price, you have a price, right? And you do business. That doesn't mean it needs to be your day-to-day, but don't be afraid of it.
Dirt Rocks works with some of the serious players in this industry. How are those relationships built? How do you earn the trust of companies at that level?
You have to prove yourself, right? And that is the biggest thing that we have learned is my understanding is earning the respect, right? And proving ourselves as a commodity. It honestly, again, we had a very, if you took the number of years of experience on the team, and you took what they wanted to achieve and accomplish over that point in time, the numbers of the years of experience would be in the hundreds. We're not the world's largest company, but if you were to add it up from experience, we could get up there pretty high. So I say all that to say you have to earn. Look, you've got to earn the right. You've got to earn the respects, and then you have to be able to deliver. Right? There was a motto that our owner came up with that was on time every time, and that really sits and resonates. And one of the greatest feedbacks that we edit that part. One of the most unique stories I have heard is we got to sit with a global supply chain head from one of the large organizations, and in our eyes, when we quote something, we feel like the schedule is going to be for the life of the project. And listen, sometimes there may be opportunities for them to generate more money on an accelerated bonus or something like that. But we were actually able to work, with Bechtel in a certain amount of time. That project was supposed to take 17 years to get this upgrade in and do the different things. We found out that just off of feedback and that we did it in half the amount of time. And that was quite amazing piece. So what we thought an additional 1 million or 2 tons would carry over for another year. It's like, no, we blew through it, because the project was going so well and they were ready to go. So, so those are, and so getting that feedback and proving yourself has been very integral for our business, for sure.
On a multi-billion-dollar project, what does the procurement process actually look like?
Right.
And how do haulers and suppliers get into that conversation?
So the procurement process looks like a lot of engineering, right? It looks like a lot of math, but the quantities are determined just like any other private project. They're locked. And so if you're lucky enough to get awarded those, typically you're going to want to have, if you're in our shoes, you're going to want to have your haulers in place embedded before you entertain that. There's plenty. These projects, they take time. These quantities take time, and believe it or not, I will draw something that is they're not really adjacent. They're quite opposite. Aggregate plays a major part in these facilities, whereas sometimes in the road building sector, the old adage would say that aggregate plays, a little part in the process, but not in these large facilities because they're in most of the time in very fragmented, very low-lying marsh-like type of areas where the subgrade is very soft or underwater. You have to place that subgrade and build it off the ground, so you're using massive amounts of material. So I would dare say that, um, you know, you have to feast on as much of the value chain as you can to get your material there.
All right, Jeremy, is there anything you change in that process?
No, I think a company of our size and our capabilities, what we have learned, and I go back to the team that um we have, and the team that we started out with, we somewhat morphed into the learnings of this as well. The understanding the reality of what you face, with projects this size. Yeah, I would say that doing it all over again, honestly, it's possible that the same mistakes would be made because we don't control the actual production, right? All we can do is set the supply chain. So, looking back on it, it was almost perfect. The owner had amazing involvement. He had a great team. Those members are still here today, that participated. Some are not, but the reality is honestly, it was laid out very correctly from an execution standpoint, right? And fundamentally, they rolled this out very well.
Dirt Rocks rolled out the trucked e-ticketing platform. Tell us how that's changed your operation with haulers, dispatch, all of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is a fantastic platform. Number one, is built by the industry for the industry, and the owner stays involved, but it was the way that they came into the market, provided what we needed, provided very high level technology that was extremely easy to adopt, right? And so, not only are we using it, but the end user uses it as well, and we dispatch right through it. So for us, it makes complete sense. Um, as far as just the capabilities of apples to oranges, um, our fulfillment center had zero issues picking up on it. And the training was amazing. So, all we have to do is communicate how to download it. Man, we've used it in, not only do we do the, facilities within Texas and along the coast, but we may go do an offshoot job in Arizona or Kansas or West Texas, which has been, Malcolm, that's been a phenomenal market. If anybody ever wants to understand how to do anything, go to West Texas because everybody can open up a pit, right? But it's not your typical hard aggregate. And so, you take that app with you everywhere you go. And then people, like I said, the ease of use, they download it. The tech is on the forefront. Um, you know, the, a shameless plug, I could probably tell you that Andrew Lindsay and Pace Davis, Pace is a trailblazer. He's brilliant. And Andrew knows the industry. And when you combine those two together, it is an amazing recipe for success. So, I will say that, so, our everyday use is to put in the fulfillment center, is for people to track and understand where, their load counts are and the capabilities are and you know, getting the full power out of these things, where I sit within the organization is hard to do, and it comes with time, but the basics of it are so fundamentally important, just what we get out of it day to day. Even what some would say, well, that's simplistic. Where I said it's not. It's extremely valuable, right?
With technology like Truckit, telematics, and everything else coming, where do you see dump trucking headed in the next 5 years? Paper ticketing has been baked into this industry forever. Do you see full adoption happening, or do carriers simply not
Yeah.
have a choice at some point?
Yeah. I have seen, we've talked over the years, right? And I have seen so much developed. There's a factory here in town at Birmingham, by the way, for those that are on the show. There's a factory here called Autocar, and it is a neat place to visit. But Autocar is very technologically advanced with their operating the building systems and within their trucks, right? And so they can cut your downtime down to an infinitesimal amount, but they can literally read what is going on with your truck. Well, how's this sensor? Can we plug in and figure it out? Are we getting all, so they're assembling the full chassis and they get all the components in and they assemble here, but everything is built off of technology within the actual unit itself. So it's fascinating to see. So they can actually dial in and limit your downtime. And honestly, that uptime is what we're all after. Then that's not a shameless plug for I don't know many people, at Autocar, but I do know that it's pretty. It was a fantastic, unique opportunity to see the factory.
With technology like Truckit, telematics, and everything else coming, where do you see dump trucking headed in the next 5 years? Paper ticketing has been baked into this industry forever. Do you see full adoption happening, or do carriers simply not have a choice at some point?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're going to have people are going to try to solve labor problems, they're going to want to know what their run rates are. They're going to want to know what their grades are. They're meaning they're grading on site. They're going to want to capture, the hours the machine's running, the location, anything to validate and verify to get closer to the margin. And I feel like technology is massive in that aspect, and will be. A lot of your large paving, we'll have to edit this, but a lot of the large paving companies or manufacturers of equipment use it as well, right? You have it in your asphalt plants. You're going to have it on your rail cars. You're going to have it on your barges. And the need for that is to know exactly when and how to enhance them, how to enhance customer success, and how to honestly set an expectation that your customer can live with. What did I pay for? Where is it? And when is it going to get here? Oh, there's two things that repeat. What I paid for, when is it going to get here? That's a plausible technological solve.
Georgia Ports just rolled out facial recognition at the Garden City terminal. Is that kind of tech something you starting to see at LNG plants and large facilities?
Yeah, it's, listen, it's always going to be something that, in my experience, it's going to be utilized in a lot of places. There's the different methodologies on forced adoption versus natural adoption. And I feel like a lot of times with forced adoption, as long as you have the ability to not adopt you may not, right? So, I do see we're probably still 5 to 10 years away from this really setting in. And, I feel like once the work, is completely, or let me say this, not just the work, but once the volume of work and the delivery methods are understood, I feel like you'll see technology, um, settle in a way where adoption becomes readily easy at this point. And we're probably still 8 years away from that.
So, Jamer, I want to pull out another area of your expertise, the CFR 2643. Do you see that program coming back, or do you think it's getting washed out? And what should haulers be doing right now if they don't have that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, Georgia had it tough. The rules under the CFR that Georgia had to comply with or by was a 1-to-1 ratio, right? It was all units had to be, deemed. You couldn't claim one truck, one lease truck equals 2 units under participation. Georgia was extremely tough, right? And plus you're under your federal highway or the weight regulation under the tandem law. I mean, you needed more trucks as it was anyway. But I feel like if you had a mandate that that was equal to 50 states, right? And that mandate was the 1-to-1 ratio. Um, I think it would better the system. I do feel like depending on what administration is in power and what they believe under the is best for the US DOT, I do believe we'll see the program again. I mean, it started back in the early '80s, and it seemed to work well. But yes, I do. I learning at some point.
Jeremy, thank you for joining us on the first episode of Hall Talk with Malcolm Smith. We didn't even scratch the surface on everything we wanted to ask you, but we definitely got to have you back. Appreciate you being a part of the advisory board for the National Dump Truck Association and helping us navigate this industry. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, I'm grateful of you having me, Malcolm, and like I said, I had nothing but success for you, and I feel like the association is vital for the industry, and I want to thank you for your time as well.
Jeremy, thank you for your time today. And also, Jeremy, thank you for being on the board at the National Dump Truck Association. We really appreciate you and all of the information and knowledge that you bring to driving this industry forward. Would love to have you back. Just was getting into the zone, man. Didn't even get to the other questions that I really want to get into. So definitely going to have you back. And I just want to say thank you again for joining us. And I want to just thank the audience for listening and for your time. This show is for you guys. It's for the industry. There's no show like it. And just want to keep lifting up the industry, informing the industry, and entertaining the industry. So guys, see you guys next week for the Hall Talk with Malcolm Smith. And thank you.